Hey, what's going on, Will family? I wanted to give a little bit of an update as to where we are in regards to our mission and our vision to see 100 churches planted nationally, 100 churches planted internationally, to be a disciple-making, a reproducing, a resourcing church in the midst of COVID and racial tension and other things that are going on in our world right now. You know, oftentimes when we think about all of the struggle, the frustration, the pain, the confusion, the injustice of the world, we can often lose sight of our ultimate vision. And I want you to know that COVID and the racial tension and other things that are going on in the world right now has not halted our vision. In reality, it's spoken and showed clearly the need to accelerate our vision. We want to be a diverse church that foreshadows our true home, and we see the beauty and the need for more of that right now, not less of it. We want to plant churches that highlight the beauty of Christ, that show the taste of the kingdom, that push back darkness, and we see the need all the more for that in this season. Even as we wrestle and as we struggle with isolation or the inability to fully connect, we see the need for more churches, not less, during this time. And so this reality has only gone to spur us on in our vision, not to halt or pull us back. You know, even in the early church where they faced problems of different kinds, you often see the acceleration of the movement of God in that season. In fact, in Acts chapter 6, beginning in verse 1, it says this: "Now in these days, when the disciples were increasing in number, a complaint by the Hellenists arose against the Hebrews, because their widows were being neglected in the daily distribution." So there was an issue. And in fact, the church wasn't originally stepping up to the issue. Just like today with racial reconciliation, historically, it was the church that began the abolition movement, that freed the slaves from slavery. It was the church that centered the civil rights movement we see in MLK and in others. But oftentimes, it's also the church that lags behind. We, rather than being the headlight, become the tail light at times. And that was happening even here. And so what happened was the elders and the pastors of the church, they realized, hey, we got to do something about this. Let's begin to take care of the widows and make sure they're fed and clothe them, because that's what the church does. We respond to the gospel in that way. But then look at what happened at the end of that, beginning in verse 7. It says, "And the word of God continued to increase, and the number of disciples multiplied," not added, multiplied greatly in Jerusalem, and a great many of the priests became obedient to the faith. And so we see in the midst of social drama, as the church stepped up to the plate, it actually began to be a witness to the world around them, and more churches, more disciples were made, churches planted out of that. We also see in Acts chapter 8, just 2 chapters later, it says this, beginning in verse 1, "And Saul approved of his," Stephen's, "execution. And there arose on that day a great persecution against the church and in Jerusalem, and they were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. Devout men buried Stephen and made great lamentation over him. But Saul was ravaging the church, entering house after house. He dragged off men, women, and committed them to prison. Now, those who were scattered went about preaching the word." Now, I'm not saying that we're facing persecution like that today. I'm not comparing COVID to that by any means. But what we see is when persecution, when trouble began to enter into the church, man, it caused a little bit of drama, it caused a little bit of hurt, and yet, as they were scattered about, the preaching of the word went that much more. The church always responds in the midst of drama to increase the reality of the gospel. In fact, one of the early church fathers in the 2nd century, where there was all this persecution of the Christians, said the blood of the saints is the seed of the church. That as we pour out our blood, man, it plants something deeply and God's name is exalted. And so what we want to do as a church is even remind us of the vision, to plant churches, to make disciples, to be able to even be a reflection to the city and someone that others can look to and say, hey, how are you having this unity even though you have this diversity? Or what is your heartbeat to church planting? Don't you lose leaders? We go, yes, we just want the kingdom. We want it to look more like Jesus's reign here on earth as it is in heaven until we finally are there face to face. And so all this season has done nothing but accelerate the need And so my encouragement to you would be to pray. Pray that we'd be able to plant 100 churches nationally, 100 churches internationally. Pray that we'd be able to make disciples. Even ask God how you can be a part of that as you pour into individuals inside this church. How can we expand and plant and make much of Jesus? That's what it's about, family. And so how has COVID, how has the racial tension and our desire for racial reconciliation, how has all of that impacted us? It's stirred up our hearts to do it that much more. And so let's do it that much more and live sent as a church family. I love you guys.